Have you ever met a character in literature that you didn't like? Well, I know I haven't. I mean, even the characters that are just awful, right, or inhumane, whichever character or primary protagonist that an author presents to us, there's something about all of them that are just absolutely fascinating or exciting, or we as readers are still intrigued by. And so that's what we're going to talk today about this idea of character development in literature. And we're going to do a case study in The Great Gatsby just for a point of reference. But it doesn't matter if you've read it or if you're going to read it, it's still all very pertinent information. So what is character? Character is really just an author has to deliberately construct a fictional individual, right? They're pulling from what do they want them to look like? I mean, they get to make them exactly how they want. It's almost like how today is how you can make kids exactly how you want. You can have the color eyes you want, right? No, it's a little different. But they get to construct this character to whoever is going to portray their message the best, right? They develop this character or this person. So characterization, though, is really just an author, and he undertakes the introduction where he introduces us, the reader, right? It's almost like a person. You first meet them and you think, wow, they're great. And then the advancement, they travel through the text, you get to know them a little bit more, and hopefully the potential transformation of a character throughout a fictional text. So that's the characterization. Now, there's different methods of characterization. And so one is a character can be developed through their dialogue. They have inner dialogue, they have outer dialogue, and of course the outer dialogue is merely just a conversation between characters. And then there is the inner dialogue, which we'll talk about in a minute, but you can discover a lot about a character just from the things that they say, just like you can tell a lot about a person by the things that they say or their speech. The other one is their reasoning or how they think, their thoughts, right? You can tell a lot about that as well. Another way in which is a method of characterization, a way in which an author will reveal or introduce a character to us is through their physical disposition. How do they carry themselves? Their physical description. What do they look like, right? And then their feelings, their emotional state, their temperament. What is that like? All of those things are considered when developing a character. And then last but not, of course not least, would be their pattern of behavior. What do they do? What are their actions? And so these are the methods of characterizations that an author uses to develop a fictional individual. Now, we talked about this inner dialogue, and an inner dialogue is really, there are 4 different platforms in which you could see that. One would be a stream of consciousness, which I think is so interesting because the first time I ever saw a stream of consciousness when I was reading a novel is when I was reading through the text, and all of a sudden this entire page was in italics, and I'm thinking, what is that? And that actually was a continuous flow of emotions and thoughts that exist inside of a character and is released and through a stream of consciousness. So we get to see or hear, or observe or watch what is going through the mind of a character. A dramatic monologue, and what all 4 of these have in common is that the stream of consciousness was happening inside, but whether or not there's an audience present that is different, and also the way in which it's communicated. One is through a novel, which you'd see in a stream of consciousness, but a dramatic monologue you would see in a poem, and it's usually a long poem, it's an extended poem, a poem where an imagined character speaks in a theatrical, exciting, outrageous way to a silent individual. So not necessarily talking to the author, but talking to another character who doesn't say anything back. And then we have this character, if we're doing a soliloquy, and usually that's in the drama. We hear a lot about these in Shakespeare's work, but a soliloquy is where a character presents an extended speech to himself, and he is all by himself on stage, or herself. And then an aside is like something off to the side. It's a character presents a short speech to the audience while they're other characters on the stage, but they're silent and they can't hear anything. So there you can hear that, you can see the difference. You have one that's a novel, which is a stream of conscious to communicate the inner dialogue. Then you have the dramatic monologue, which comes across in a poem. And then we have the soliloquy and aside, which are typically in plays or drama. The character origin, like how we know the methods of characterizations and how an author communicates this, but who is the one that gets to deliver this information? Who's the one that gets to tell us, right? Well, it could be a lot of different people. It could be the author himself. It could be Francis Scott Fitzgerald in Great Gatsby. It could be the writer. It could be the narrator. He gives us Nick to, and hopefully it's a reliable narrator, but he can give us a narrator to communicate who this character is. Also, the character himself, we get to see the character in action. So not just the commentary from the author and not just the comments from the narrator, but the character himself. And of course, we get to see the methods of characterization, the way others react to them would be through other characters. That's another way in which the methods of characterizations are delivered. In essence, then, the character cycle looks a lot like this. The author creates or constructs deliberately this character. They evolve in the literature, they're revealed to us, and typically the author wants the character to be as real as possible. That's necessary, right, for us to believe them. We have certain expectations as we learn about characters. We have expectations of how they're going to behave or what they may or may not do. Just like our friends, our peers. You know, if someone says, "Oh, you know, so and so did this," and we may say, "Gosh, that's not like them to do that." Well, when we read literature and the author has communicated their methods of characterizations, and we have come to know this character, we expect them to be real, and that we can almost not necessarily know for sure what they're going to do, but we can anticipate some of their behaviors. Another way that an author can communicate a character is to show us, right? Is to let us see what they're doing and what they're saying and all of their interactions and their experiences. But they can also tell us. They can just tell us outright. You know, it could be the narrator that just tells us, like Nick just tells us, "Gosh, Gatsby is this, that, and the other," right? So it could be implicit or explicit as well. The driving force or the motivation, that is super important when looking at a character. And you need to know that there's two different ways in which a character is motivated. It's either intrinsic or extrinsic, just like us. We're motivated by something inside of us or something outside of us. And so everything that a character does, their actions, it's motivated by something. And so if we as a reader can identify a character's motivation, we begin to understand more why they do what they do, why they say what they do, or say what they say. So intrinsic value would obviously be the things that you can't see. Like maybe it's like, I just want more information. I want to be knowledgeable. I want to be smart. I want, to have, to be respected. So that's going to motivate me in the things that I do. However, there's extrinsic, right? The things outside, like I need power. I want money. I want Daisy, right? In Gatsby's case. So we could see why he throws these parties, or why he shows off his cars, and why he befriends Nick, and why he lets her drive his car. All of these things are motivated by whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic. Also, part of the driving force or motivation is to know a character's desires. We know Gatsby is in love with Daisy, right? And he'll do everything, accumulate wealth, move to the West Side, and all sorts of stuff. We also want to know a character's temperament, right? How do they react to things? And we know from reading Gatsby, if you have, that he's really calm and collective, and it's hard to get him to change a whole lot. So when you watch him or you read about him, he's very collective. He's very calm about everything. Also, their moral nature, right? That tells us a lot about how a character is motivated. So we all know about the different types of characters. There's the protagonists, right? And this is the main character, the person, the hero or the heroine, the chief character in the text, the central figure. Everything revolves around the protagonist. Can you imagine a world where everything revolves around us? I mean, every day we are the protagonist in our own world, right? Because according to us, everything revolves around us. That's the protagonist. And then you have this antagonist, which can be a character or it could be an inner struggle that we have. But the antagonist is the opposition to the protagonist, or it can be an internal figure. The antagonist resists any resolution that a main character has. So we know that in Great Gatsby, the protagonist is Gatsby himself. And then Tom Buchanan serves as the antagonist, right? And Tom isn't going to just let Gatsby have Daisy, even though Tom clearly doesn't want her, right? But he's going to resist it, and that's the purpose of the antagonist in a work. There's also what's called foils in literature, and in this case, for this example, and the point of reference would be Great Gatsby. We see Daisy and Myrtle, right? And the affection of Tom Buchanan, the two women in his lives, and they serve as foils. And, you know, foils are a secondary character who differs from the protagonist to illuminate or enhance the qualities of the main character. It's through the difference in the character traits and qualities and values between the two that allows the protagonist to stand out. In this case, it's not necessarily the protagonist, because Daisy isn't the protagonist of the text. If we were looking at Gatsby's foil, it might be Nick Carraway, it might be Tom Buchanan, even though he also serves as the antagonist. But in this case, the two of these juxtaposed together, you get to really see, right, wow, who Daisy is. There's a stark contrast between Myrtle and Daisy in the text. And so this indicates the foil, and it illuminates, enhances the character of Daisy. We get to see just, you know, how outrageous she is, even though Myrtle, in a sense, is a bit crazy as well. There are different character types. And so you probably have been introduced to these concepts. There's the round character. A round character is just that. They're well developed. They're fully developed. We know what they look like, what the things that they say. We know they're complex. They're interesting. And oftentimes they're the protagonist. In this case, if we're looking at our point of reference in The Great Gatsby, Gatsby himself is a round character. We know what he looks like, what he drives, where he lives, how he feels. He's fully developed. We see the methods of characterizations. We know how other people respond to him. We know what he thinks of other people. We see him everywhere, right? He is fully developed. So that's a round character. A flat character, on the other hand, we know their name. We might see them here and there. In this case, Jordan Baker might serve as a flat character in The Great Gatsby. And not as fully developed. So they're mentioned in the text, but the text certainly doesn't revolve around this individual. A dynamic character is a character who, in all of the events, everything that they go through, all of the changes in the text, this character actually changes as a result of the events that occur throughout the text. So maybe they're one way in the beginning. And Nick Carraway, our narrator, is a great example of a dynamic character. I'd like to say that Gatsby is, but I don't know how much he's really changed. He's round. I don't know if I'm convinced that he's dynamic, but Nick definitely starts off a certain way, and then he learns so much from being the narrator, right? Because he's on the outside. He gets to see everybody, especially he learns the most from Gatsby, and he realizes, wow, this is not what I want. Oh, wow. And I think he ends up at the end leaving and doing something else. So he's a dynamic character. He changes. Then you have a static character, right? They stay the same. They don't change no matter what happens to them. They don't change. And if you think of The Great Gatsby, you think of the Buchanans, Tom and Daisy Buchanan, they don't change. Right? At the beginning, they're self-absorbed. They just want to have a great time. They're reckless. And at the end, they're the same way. They don't change. So they're a static character. Now, it's possible for characters to have a combination of these qualities. They might be round and dynamic, or they could be flat and maybe dynamic, or perhaps even more a static character would make more sense, logical sense. And then a quick talk about minor characters. A minor character interacts with the major characters. That's the purpose they serve. I mean, can you think about a group of friends that you have on campus, and you might have some minor friends. Maybe there's a couple of you who are boisterous and exciting, and then there's some of them that are just there maybe to interact with. You might be in a conversation or at lunch and you're talking, and every once in a while you might interact with them. The plot doesn't revolve around that minor character, right? And maybe the minor character likes that. Like, I wouldn't mind being a minor character because I couldn't imagine. And could you imagine the protagonist if you have a group of friends and like, gosh, like this person thinks the world revolves around him. Well, that's your protagonist, and maybe every once in a while they chat with you. The plot doesn't revolve around the minor character, and the minor character remains unchanged throughout the text. So, like, Jordan, she stays the same. She's just there to chat with Daisy and to go to parties with her and have conversations, right? She complements the protagonist, or not necessarily protagonist, but other major characters in the text. And minor characters, they advance the plot. I think even Gatsby went through Jordan to get to Nick, right? Or even to get to Daisy. So they serve a purpose. They're there for a reason. And so when we think about these minor characters and we talk about them, we want to be specific in terms of what purpose they serve. We have the character viewpoint. Like, they only know what they know. And so you might be reading a text and go, oh my gosh, why is he doing that? Well, that's just their viewpoint. That's who they are. They can't be anything or anyone else but that. So a character perspective comes from how the character thinks. They don't think like us. So we might be saying, oh, I wouldn't do that, or that doesn't make sense. Well, that's that character's perspective. And so it's important for us as readers to understand how they think, the choices they make, and the actions that they take. When characters in literature experience like an epiphany where they go, oh, they start to learn things, their perspective changes, can change in the literary work. And this is perhaps where they become like a dynamic character, if that change is like a huge change. A character perspective is the way in which she makes sense, his or her makes sense of a situation. So it's the way in which they understand what's happening to them in a text. And perspective comes from, their background. In this case with Gatsby, comes from humble beginnings. He said he served, I think, in the war, right? His experiences, his personality, he's a little charismatic, maybe his character, his personality traits, his preferences, what he likes, right? And his circle of friends, all of that is contributes to his perspective. And I don't know if you can see this section in the corner here, but character perspective through connections to others and the setting and also the experiences that they have. Functions of literary characters. Characters all serve a purpose. One of the primary functions of literature, and this list, by the way, is endless. I just have 8, but it drives, or they drive and advance the plot. Right? They are the one behind the steering wheel, and they're driving and moving the plot along. Another thing is they develop characters, literary characters develop the theme of a work. If you want to discover the theme, the universal idea or concept, watch the character. Find out what it is that they're supposed to learn and didn't or did. And so they're developing the theme of a text. Also, a literary character enriches a reader's experience, right? I may be living in this area and I've only been exposed to this much. And so my life is maybe right here. And then when I get access to this literature, now I've enhanced my own experiences, because now I'm like, I've observed this, I've experienced this. And now my exposure is much bigger. Also, literary characters enlarges our view of the world. We start to see things differently, right? Our perspectives may change because of the experiences we have with different characters. It elicits compassion in a reader. When we read about a text and maybe we're not so excited about the character, we're fascinated by them, and the more we get to know them, the more we start to care about the character, and we really want the best for them, right? Also, it connects the reader. The literary characters connect readers to an author, right? We begin to understand why the author makes the choices that they do. It definitely provides a pleasure of escape for the modern world. When we read literature, it takes us somewhere else. Even if you still have to do a close read, you're still not worrying about what you've got going on. You're looking in somebody else's life, right? And then one of the last ones we've discovered is that a lot of times when you read literature, no matter how old it is, you go, oh my gosh, this is happening today. This issue that happened, in this time frame is still happening, right? So the same issues exist from 100 years ago. They exist today. And so that's a lot of times what literary characters show us. The problems in characters, same as problems with us as individuals, fictional characters. They either have a tragic flaw in many cases. The protagonist has a shortcoming that leads to his or her downfall or destruction. In this case, Gatsby, right? He is so naive. He can't see, he's blinded by love, that he can't see that Daisy's never going to be his. And maybe we don't even recognize that, and we're shocked by the ending as well. But it's a tragic flaw because what happens? He dies, right? Then there's hubris pride. And I don't think Gatsby possesses hubris pride. Excessive amounts of pride followed by shocking behavior, which usually leads to destruction. So this is when you have too much pride. And that would be hubris pride. And sometimes we always have to check ourselves. We might be on top of the world, right? And then we need to remember, wow, we better humble ourselves, because if we don't and we become too prideful, then it leads to our destruction. The same thing that happens in literature happens in real life. And then hamartia, an error in judgment as a result of lack of awareness. And when someone makes a mistake, or a character makes a mistake, they don't even realize, right? Like in Oedipus, when he marries his mother. But he doesn't know, right? So you can't even really blame him, even though he blames himself. So those are the problems that exist with characters in literature. Now, you guys are also familiar with the character archetypes, right? Or the stock characters, like, and you go to the store, you'll say, I'll take this and I'll take that. Well, sometimes authors do this too, where they'll say, you know what, I want to construct someone, but not today. I think I'll have this kind of character. Or even as teachers, we're in a classroom and you're as a student, you might think, I'm special, right? And you don't realize that your teacher has 6 periods, and even though you've got a different name and you're sitting in a different seat and it's a different period, you're an archetype. We're like, oh yeah, I've seen this kid before. You're the Joker, right? And so the different types of character archetypes, the common ones, and there's several, it's not limited to this list. There are the Jokers. This is Prince Hal from Henry IV. Then there's the Magician. And you probably want to make a note of the strengths and weaknesses and the actual character themselves. We have Macbeth. Then there's the Ruler, right? The strengths are power, communication, and then they want control at all costs, right? And they're paranoid, like they just, so I'm sure you can think of characters like that. Additional character archetypes. When I think of myself, if I were a character archetype, I think I'm the rebel. Like, I never give up. And so I can inspire the masses. Wow, that's a nice feeling. And so when I think of the rebel, I think of Atticus from To Kill a Mockingbird. And then we have the lover, right? And this would be Gatsby. They have their strengths, they have the weaknesses, and then we know their motivation. When you can identify an archetype where you're like, oh, wait a minute, I've seen this type of character in literature before, it makes it so much easier. Then you're just like, I already know what they're capable of. I already know what their weaknesses are, and I know what drives them. And then we have the seducer, which in this case, from our point of reference in The Great Gatsby, it's Daisy, right? She seduces Gatsby. She almost even seduces Tom Buchanan, her husband. Some additional archetypes in literature, we have the warrior, right? And when I think of the warrior, I think of Jack from Lord of the Flies. We have the childlike, and this is someone who's trusting, right? And that might be a scout from To Kill a Mockingbird. And then we have the orphan. And when I think of the orphan and some of the strengths and weaknesses, I think of Piggy from Lord of the Flies. So those are just some examples of archetypes. You might want to hit pause or rewind to get a little bit more detailed information. And then there's the creator. This is Othello from Shakespeare's work. There's the caregiver, and this is Boo Radley. This is who I think of when I think of the caregiver, at least from To Kill a Mockingbird. And then Atticus shows up again. He's the mentor. So you get these stock characters or these archetypes, and it's important to know because it really helps you just communicate. The author can communicate so much more with just having an archetype, but it's our job as readers to identify it. So this is our character development in literature, a case study in The Great Gatsby. We've talked about ways in which characters are developed, their character origin, problems in characters, archetypes, different round, dynamic, static characters. So hopefully this will give you more insight when you're talking about different characters, that you use the language and can discuss specifically what characters do and why.